Good morning, good afternoon. Well, actually, good evening, everyone. I'm too used to speak globally, but I know that there are some people joining us from other places than the United Kingdom. So this is a first ever webinar using this new technology. We have used other types of tools before, including Cisco WebEx. This time we're using the Zoom tool. So welcome everybody on this call, which is going to be about user trust. In fact, the policy framework for an open and trusted internet. There is a European chapters meeting that will take place on the 22nd and 23rd of February. So that's next week, I believe. That European chapters meeting will focus specifically on this issue. We issued a few months ago, I think already, a call, maybe last month, we issued a call for people who were interested in attending this meeting, and Ansgar responded. Ansgar Kerner, who is going to be running the webinar today, has responded positively and has prepared for this European chapters meeting. There were a couple of meetings that took place in mid-January where Kathy Brown, the CEO of ISOC, passed by very quickly through London and had a quick meeting with a few people, including Ansgar and a few others who were in the area at the time, specifically talking about this topic. And now we are preparing for this meeting. Ansgar is going to present to you with some the details of what is being considered in a paper that was drafted by Internet Society staff in June 2016. And it's going to be asking us some questions. And really, this is not just a webinar, it's the occasion for all of you to be able to contribute to the input that this chapter, the UK-England chapter, is going to be able to send to this European chapters meeting, which will take place in Amsterdam. So without any further ado, I guess I just need to introduce to you Ansgar Kerner from the University of Nottingham. Perhaps, Ansgar, you could say first a few words about yourself, and then proceed forward with taking us through a few slides. The way that this meeting is arranged at the moment. So Ansgar will take about 20 minutes for his presentation. You may access the slide deck, presentation slide deck, through the web page that pertains to this meeting. I'll put the link to the web page on the chat at the moment. If you click on that, and then you'll find a copy of the presentation at the bottom of this web page, presentation slide deck, either in PowerPoint or in PDF. After that, we have about 50 minutes to discuss things and for Ansgar to get that input from all of you, and then a few conclusions and next steps. So we have the call scheduled for 90 minutes. If it takes less time, it's absolutely fine, but I just wanted to make sure that we've got enough of a time slot in case we get into really deep and heated discussions. Anyway, Ansgar, over to you, and please just quickly introduce yourself, your background, and so on, and then let's proceed forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so my name is Ansgar Kerner. I'm a senior research fellow at the University of Nottingham's Digital Economy Research Institute. So we do research on how data is being used, the ethics around that, how digital technologies are being used, the impact they have on society. And currently, I'm leading a work package on a project around the impact of algorithms in controlling people's access to data. And this is sort of this multi-stakeholder engagement work package. So that way, I became very much interested in this question of user trust, because user trust is sort of one of the main issues also when it comes to the issue of algorithms accessing data. But we want to look beyond that, not just the algorithm question, but the general question of user trust with the internet. So with that, I guess I'll start with my presentation first. So this, as Olivier mentioned, this is based on the paper that was developed by ISOC last year, a policy framework for an open and trusted internet. So the challenge that was really being addressed with this paper was issues of diminishing trust by users. And with users, we mean individuals, but also governments and corporations, everybody who uses the internet, everybody or every group organization. So there's issues around diminishing trust due to things like data breaches, uncertainty about how data is being used, questions of cybercrime, surveillance, and issues like that. But then also on the policymaker side, there's increasingly challenge of policymakers trying to embrace digital evolution as a way to grow economy, but at the same time needing to ensure safety and security for citizens. So this is where we see new legislation being developed, things like the Investigative Powers Bill, which are not necessarily completely thought through in the way that we would have hoped. But so these are kind of policy making challenges that exist. So ISOC's position, basic sort of fundamental position on this, as presented in the paper, is that trust is the cornerstone of connectivity. You need trust. It's required for collective responsibility and collaboration between all of the stakeholders that are involved in making the internet actually work. So the approach is being to sort of subdivide the issue of open and trusted internet into four sort of main elements that are closely connected to each other. So user trust being one, then trusted networks, the technologies for trust, and a trustworthy ecosystem. And I'll go through those now. So the brief summary for each of these is that user trust focuses on the how and why users, as I said, including government, private sectors, and citizens, should trust the internet and how to build that trust. The technologies for trust element focuses on the technical building blocks for trusted networks, the applications and services. The trusted networks element is on the internet as an ever-evolving collection of interconnected networks with distributed ownership and control. So focusing on the fact that trust is the glue that keeps these networks connected and exchanging data. Without trust, it will fall apart into non-connected networks and you won't have an actual internet anymore. And finally, the trustworthy ecosystems element is on how the internet is governed and how it deals with internet issues. So in a bit more detail, the user trust element, it sort of can be summarized as consisting of the following parts. Sort of the main core element being human rights, which is to say that human rights need to be integrated in internet policies as they develop, not as an added afterthought or something. They should really be at the core of how the policies are being made. And then connected to that is communications confidentialities. People using the internet need to be able to communicate through confidential online method. So this will involve things like encryption. Obviously, closely connected to that is the issue of privacy, that everybody should have the right and expectations of privacy, irrespective of the nationality or the residence of where they are. There can be no pervasive surveillance, and the ability to communicate anonymously or pseudonymously must exist. Then on consumer protection, there needs to be enforcement of consumer protection laws for business to work. And this requires international cooperation due to the international nature of the internet. Then there's control over data, which is also very important, the ability to take data from one service to another, a key part for making sure that there is a true free competition between services online. Then we have transparency in policy making. I think a very important aspect that ISOC is really championed through its multi-stakeholder process, the open and transparent decisions. Policy making should be open and transparent, and the decisions, policies, laws, and practices have to be that way. They have to actively involve stakeholders in the development of these policies. And then there's a legal certainty. So laws have to be clear, they have to be easy to understand and accessible to all. Then we have the enforcement and remedies aspect to this, which is to say that regulatory authorities have to have the necessary resources and independence to provide effective law enforcement and remedies. Then non-discrimination. So the internet should never be able to be used as a means for discriminating between groups, between people, or on the basis of anything, class or category. And finally, watchdog and whistleblowers have to be respected as playing an important role in ensuring that all of the above are implemented properly. So that's the user trust element. All of these things play a role in making sure that users can have good and strong trust in the internet. So then on the technology side, the technologies for trust, the document outlines a number of points that governments should do, which is empowering users to adopt own technical measures of protection, encourage open development and open access to easy to use tools to communicate confidentially, and encourage end-to-end encryption. So this also means that governments should not limit the use of encryption or mandate backdoors or vulnerabilities, including third-party access to encryption, should not weaken or undermine encryption standards or compel or presume an entity to act against these tenets. Unfortunately, all of these things seem to be things that the current UK government is not or is doing, so they're not following what the document is asking, what the ISOC is asking from them. So all of this is meant to ensure that users should have the option to use strongest encryption available. Then on the trusted networks side, on the one hand, we have security issues, cybersecurity issues, which is that they should advance the economy and social prosperity, but not hinder the growth and innovation of development, any cybersecurity methodologies. They should embrace the expertise of all stakeholders and work collaboratively. So not just security agencies, but also the companies that are involved in providing services, and NGOs and other independent people who have clear expertise. We should integrate human rights. So it's important that safety and security has to be provided with individual rights. It's not the trade-off sacrificing some individual rights in order to get safety and security, but rather maintain that safety and security are provided while at the same time providing individuals' rights. And there's defining and implement where they have most impact. So the cybersecurity methods should be used where they have impact and not just broadly used where they might instead hinder growth and such matters. And importantly, due to the nature of the internet, it requires cross-border collaboration. So on the other element to trusted networks is the connecting of networks and sending of traffic. So the way in which data is routed through the internet. So governments should refrain from mandating data localization or the prescribing of traffic routes. Should encourage regional and international companies to participate in local interconnection and peering. Should foster investment in infrastructure for resilience, provide legal environment that supports competitive markets in online services, all of which basically is to say to support the open technical standards as provided in the open principles. Which brings us to the last of the main columns, the trustworthy ecosystem element, which is about providing inclusiveness and transparency, so which provides the basis for legitimacy is provided by making sure that those people who are affected by policies about the internet are also involved in making those policies, which, as the document outlines, is an essential part of an effective process for building trustworthy ecosystems. So this basically points towards shared responsibility, collective stewardship of the internet, and open standards. It's that the technologies that the internet is based on. So this is sort of the technological community's shared responsibility to make sure that open standards and technologies remain open. And then also for the trustworthy ecosystem is the requirement for effective decision-making and implementation. It needs to be based on a broad and open deliberative process, because the only way to get stakeholders to truly be motivated to work towards implementing the decisions is if they are involved in making in the process of making these decisions. So this leads to collaboration of distributed and interoperable governance, which is to say we have to think about the internet as a collaborative process, autonomy with dialogue and mutual participation between organizations that are involved in internet governance. It's not sort of a top-down regulated system with hierarchical system, but rather a collaborative process between autonomous actors. So this is that was the sort of quick summary of the points that are put together in the document, the policy framework for an open and trusted internet. And I wanted to end by just listing the program points, the preliminary agenda that has been put together for the European chapters meeting next week, sort of to frame the subsequent discussion now. So the discussion points next week will be, first of all, editorial responsibility for online content, which is to say the question of to what extent platform neutrality is still true, and to what extent recommender systems and the problem of fake news are all linked with each other. And this is a discussion element that I've proposed and will be leading. Then there's will be a discussion on collaborative security, a discussion on user trust with regard to longevity and security of IoT devices, followed by a discussion on search ranking technologies, and the meeting will be ending with a roundtable discussion on current issues related to user trust in Europe. So these are the agenda points that have been put forward. Finally, a couple of points that we might want to discuss today and might want to take forward to the chapters meeting as well could be discussions on, more generally, privacy or data breaches or data literacy issues. And perhaps since we are the UK branch, we might want to take forward some more detailed discussion regarding the government surveillance powers, considering our recent experiences with the Investigative Powers Act, at least the way in which the bill was pushed through with very little discussion and proper debate within Parliament, actually. and potentially questions of the impact of nation-first anti-globalization kind of movements, such as Brexit. What kind of an impact do these have on the internet as an international collaborative enterprise? And last on this group, perhaps there's the issue of governance of the platform economy. Specifically, I was thinking about the way in which some companies are potentially abusing the way in the sort of their classification as being a tech company as opposed to, say, a taxi company in the case of Uber, or other kinds of companies for which there are existing regulations. So the use of tech company as a status for avoiding regulatory responsibilities. And finally, we might want to discuss the recent call from UNESCO regarding Internet universality indicators. Is there a case to be made to perhaps want to put forward user trust indicators? And if so, what would be the methodology of doing that? So far my presentation, I guess I'll hand the control over back to Olivier so that we can go towards more open discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Ansgar, for this good summary of all the work and of the whole slide deck of what is going to be discussed and what is in the paper that will form the basis of those discussions. So this really is a time for input from the participants in this call. And I gather that the first thing really is whether there are any questions on any aspects of the points that you have made. Okay, oh, I see a hand up from Desiree Milosevic. So Desiree, you have the floor.
Thank you. I guess you can hear me well?
Yep, absolutely.
I'd like to thank Ansgar for this very good presentation. I believe we now have a better understanding what the agenda for the 2 days chapters meeting on trust will look like. And just to start with, is just a point of clarification, if I may ask about this Internet universality indicators by UNESCO. Is that a call for papers to work with other organizations, or could you just please clarify what it is? Thank you.
Sure. So basically, a week ago or so, there came through a call from UNESCO to propose a project. It's project proposals they were looking for as to the implementation of these indicators. So they've got a preliminary document which outlines the idea behind the indicators for measuring the extent to which internet has been successfully implemented within a country. It's about helping the country identify the elements, the areas where they might want to put in more efforts in order to get a properly implemented internet, as opposed to a method for ranking countries against each other. It's not about comparing countries, it's about helping countries develop themselves or get input from things like World Bank or other external sources to help them in their development. So I was initially looking at it as possibly something from our university as well to be involved in. However, the time frame they've set is very short. They want the project to start this April and end April 2018. So it's a one-year project. Preliminary results have to be ready by October. And there's no indication as to what kind of a budget might be available to help in doing this. It's supposed to be developed through a multi-stakeholder process involving both developed and developing countries, so that these indicators and the methodologies for how to collect the data in order to use the indicators are properly usable in all countries. So my assessment was that in order to be able to usefully contribute to that project, one would need to have an existing network really of people, so that you could, because otherwise, if the preliminary results have to be out there already in half a year's time, you need to build your stakeholder group before you can even have a stakeholder meeting to discuss these things. And so you need to already have basically that network, otherwise you won't be able to do that within 6 months.
Yes, just that's why I asked a clarification when you said they came to us, whether that was an open process or they came to your university.
It was an open. Actually, I think it was someone else. I think I saw it on one of the ISOC mailing lists. The message came through.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Desiree, for this question, and thanks for the answer, Ansgar. I was just looking through the whole listing of technologies for trust, and I couldn't help thinking of a recent development that has taken place at the ITUD, ITU being the International Telecommunications Union, and there's currently some work on the laws on cybercrime legislation. The D is the development part of the ITU, and I was told that there was certainly as far as the work taking place in the Pacific Islands, so on the other side of the world, the work on the cybercrime legislation is being interpreted nationally in ways that might excessively restrict freedom of speech. And you've touched on this in our own context of a trusted internet. What are the angles that one has to avoid specifically if one is to avoid restrictions on freedom of speech? And I'm not saying that there is looking at sort of European-wide, bearing in mind, of course, that we do have the Budapest Convention in most of Europe for this, but I'm not quite sure where we're going for that. Ansgar?
Well, I guess within Europe, and specifically from the UK, actually, with the Investigative Powers Act, we've recently had the European Court looking at the European Court of Justice, I think it was, making a ruling on the blanket non-targeted collection of data methods that are proposed that are included in the Investigative Powers Act, and ruled that these are violations of human rights, basically. So coming back to the first point of the user trust elements in the ISOC document, human rights is the first basis for user trust. And not knowing whether or not your data is currently under surveillance, because surveillance laws can be so broad that they will just collect anything on the assumption that if we collect everything, perhaps we'll be able to find somebody who's planning something bad, violates your right to free communication. So that's one element, certainly, where we've got a current issue, and I think the UK government has said they're going to look at it or something, but they've certainly not agreed to make a direct amendment to the Investigative Powers Act. So this is still an issue that needs to be worked out, how to rein in this desire for powers to collect. It basically comes from a combination of fear about terrorism issues and a exaggerated hope in that big data kind of ways will be able to solve everything. If you just hoover up enough data and mine it, you'll be able to find all of the bad actors without somehow simultaneously causing problems for the general populace. So I think for ISOC, the point is one of educating policymakers as to how data flows actually work. What kind of information do you end up collecting if you use certain methods, and how invasive things are, to what extent does it violate human rights, and that we try to change the mindset around this. But I don't actually know directly what the current status is of, for instance, the response to the ruling of the European Court of Justice within the UK government, and what ISOC is doing in this direction. Obviously, groups like Open Rights Group and other civil rights organizations are directly involved in this, but I don't really know what ISOC is doing. Perhaps you might know something on this?
Yeah, thanks for this, Ansgar. It's Olivier speaking. Not specifically. The Internet Society is following these things, but they're not acting in a specific direction. We did have a webinar that Desiree and I actually presented during one of the recent, well, not so recent now, the last European chapters meeting that took place in Brussels. And we described the investigatory powers, but of course that was still when it was in discussion, not after the act, the bill was turned into an act. But there might be something happening in the future, and I guess it probably is going to be something that you will be discussing yourself, because I know for sure that a number of other European countries are very intrigued about what this all entices, and you probably will have to, you'll be able to tell them about it. And let them know how things are. I note also that on the implementation front, there is still great confusion. Having followed the UK Network Operators Forum, there's great confusion as to how all of these powers are to be implemented, whether that requires installation of equipment, who pays for the equipment, the bandwidth used for any of this. And so there are big question marks still around there. There's a queue in operation at the moment in the queue. I see Kristen Larinaga and Wale Bakari. So let's start with Christian. You have the floor.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, very well.
Fabulous. Ansgar, thank you for a great presentation. It's very helpful, actually, to get it all sort of set out in one place, all those points. I just want to kind of follow up on the last kind of conversational bit. One of the things about the IP Act is that it's a bit like the general thought, I think, within the background of the IP Act was not to get access to all the data in one fell swoop, but was to have it available so that they could do targeted investigations onto the data. And this opens up a whole host of different types of problems. And what worries me about this, it's a bit like, I don't want to see this turning into like an abortion debate, where one group of people say that life starts on conception, another group say life starts at birth, and there are lots of people in the middle somewhere arguing. And what I mean by that is that the way this debate is being handled is the UK authorities basically say we're not spying on everybody, and don't accept the judgments of the ECJ and others, because they're saying that they're not spying on anybody until they actually issue a warrant, and they have a double lock and various other measures they put into the Act which protect privacy and do all these nice things. The unfortunate side effect is from the other point of the coin, which is, I think, the point of coin where we're coming from, is that the very fact you've taken this data and restored it makes it vulnerable, and actually puts it into play in various ways. And there's never been a kind of compromise position possible between those two positions. And at the moment, we now got a situation where the Act is in force and it is being implemented. there is confusion, as Olivia says, although that confusion is really with people who haven't yet been approached with a letter saying you will do X, Y, and Z. I gather those that have been have a pretty clear idea of what they've been asked to do, and given a pretty clear indication that they're not allowed to talk to anybody about it. That's another problem with this, which is that it introduces another vulnerability, that we have a situation where people are doing things and they can't talk about it, and they can't actually even without attribution talk about it. So it becomes a situation where people can be subverted in various ways to do things that you can't necessarily expect. Now, it may be that we can trust them and that they won't do nasty things, as they claim, and they'll live within the law. But it's also the case for the last 35 years that those very same agencies lied to the very committee in Parliament that's supposed to be overseeing them. So, there is a trust breakdown here, and this is one of the big problems I think we have with the way the IP Act has been framed. It's another sort of one of the problems, which is that the environment for trust with the agencies that are being asking us to trust them, they themselves are broken, and they've not really made any effort to repair that trust or to provide adequate mechanisms, as far as I can see, to create an oversight regime that is, could rebuild that trust, and that's another issue. So the other point I want to raise about this, I think, in terms of you going to Europe next week, is that we are in Brexit, and the direction of travel of this government is quite astonishing, and has been cloistered into a very narrow political opinion as to about what's going on, and they're taking the agenda and running with it without any real consultation or any real thought of consultation, or even any doubt being expressed externally as to what they're planning on doing. And one of the things that's coming out of this is that they want to move out of the European Court of Justice. They want to move out of all the European institutions. They even want to move out of the European Court of Human Rights. And this is a thing that Theresa May was very keen on prior to the Brexit vote. So it's rather ironic that Britain actually established that particular court to develop human rights in Europe as a kind of consensus mechanism for the whole of Europe, and now is actually actively trying to dismantle it. Now, in the context, I think, of the IP Act, that's a real problem, because they're not going to recognise the ECJ. They're going to pull out. The Europeans are arguing already that we can't pull out of the ECJ. So the way this travels is going to be a very complex issue, I feel. I don't really see the UK authorities, and I include the secret. The secret agenda in the UK, which is very strong and has been for many years, I don't see them bending at all on this, and I suspect that this is going to be a major part of the UK leaving the European Union, and Europe will be this agenda, and I don't think they're going to pull out of doing things like the IP Act. They've already indicated that they want to introduce the Espionage Act and create 14-year sentences for people who whistleblow or pass on documents. And this is subverting. A lot of journalists, a lot of the freedom organisations like Liberty are very worried now by this. So we're in a very difficult period of time politically, I think, when we're talking about trust. And the question I think we have as an ISOC community is how technical, where do we stand on this? Do we stand on this as a technical issue and just try to keep it even-handed on technicalities, or whether we move on to the human rights agenda and start to play into that ball? My own view is that I would like to see people take some. I'd like to see the internet community in the UK actually sort of be a bit clearer about where they feel about it. At the moment, the ISPs only talk about costs. So if they're going to get done for doing some surveillance, they want to get repaid for it. They've not really approached this as a human rights issue or as a trust issue. So the question then is, what does the internet society community do? Now this trust agenda is coming forward, which I think is very valuable, is how do we build this from the technical standards, openness point of view of the internet for everyone. How do we build that from that platform, the issue of trust, to develop this further forward? And I don't have an answer for that, but I think it would be. I think it's a question as to how we do this and who we get involved to take this issue, to take the very many issues forward. So when you come back from Europe, I'd be very interested to get your feedback as to how the European chapters and the ISOC policy people are viewing this, and whether they had any advice to offer, whether they'd be interested in working with us in any of these areas. Also, any kind of things in the European context that are happening there, which have similarities to us, perhaps in a slightly different way. France has had a number of initiatives in this area, Holland, a number of other countries. So it'd be interesting to see, and the Germans, of course, so it'd be interesting to see what other people feel about this and what the sort of state of play is as other ISOC chapters see it. So I'd be slightly long-winded, but I hope that was a useful comment.
Thanks, Christian. Ansgar?
Yes, thank you very much. I think you make very good points. Perhaps one observation on what you mentioned at the earlier part, the oversight regime issues with the Investigative Powers Act and sort of the problem with the gagging orders. That was actually an issue when I had a discussion with people from the Home Office about the IP bill at the time. I expressed concern about the fact that this sort of the not being allowed to talk about the fact that a warrant was being served to you, and that this could potentially lead to abuse. And I tried to push them to clarify, at the very least, to what extent people are even allowed to talk to their lawyers once they get a warrant like this issued. So they say, yes, you can ask advice from, well, you can't just go to your lawyer, but you can approach the legal oversight people within the investigative powers system to ask for clarification around the warrant that's been served to you. Personally, I'd be more comfortable if we said, okay, we have trusted legal systems, so if you're being served with a warrant, you can go, or at the very least, there should be a broad group within the legal system that is assigned as trustworthy enough for people to go to say, can you give me advice regarding this warrant that's been served to me? So yeah, I'm also quite uncomfortable with the oversight mechanisms, and we need to see more about how the judge that is being involved in the signing off on warrants, how that side is actually being implemented properly, because questions of what kind of budget is being given to them, whether they will have enough staff to properly review all warrants that are being applied for, etc., were not clear at that time. And then, yes, with Brexit and pulling out from the European Court and the Court of Human Rights, I possibly sort of going along a little bit with this approach of it's all about the economy, there is still a possibility to bring back the human rights issue, I think, if we talk about the question of the digital single market. If UK companies want to be able to use the digital single market to sell their products, their services online to the EU, they will have to be still abiding by the European regulations. Otherwise, you can't deal with European customers. Under the GDPR applies to companies that are outside of the EU, even if they want to do business with people in the EU. So there might be something along that line that ISAC could be using as a way of trying to strengthen the human rights thing. Because I do think, for me personally at least, if we're talking about user trust, and user trust being a key element for ISAC, then I think human rights needs to be something that we engage with, and that we don't just say we're focusing only on the technical aspect. But I think it's open to the community to say it's supposed to be a multi-stakeholder process after all. So I'll stop talking and let other people have their say.
I had a question regarding the topics for the preliminary agenda on page 12 of your presentation. It says here, editorial responsibility for online content and the problem of fake news. Now, I hadn't thought that the issue of trust was somehow related to fake news and until recently, I guess, because the internet, I've never really, I guess, found the internet to be a trustworthy source of information. But I mean, when you start speaking about editorial responsibility for online content, is it editorial responsibility by the internet service provider or the platform provider, or by the actual owners of the blog or the originators of the news? How do you see that, Ansgar?
Right. Yes. So I think if we're talking about editorial responsibility, we need to think about all parties who are involved in the way in which the information reaches people. So at this moment, platform providers like social media platforms tend to say that they don't have editorial responsibility because they didn't create the content. The responsibility around factualness of the content and anything around the content should lie with the people who created this. At one level, that makes sense. However, if we look at the way in which content actually reaches people, the online platforms start to play a role in this as well. Their algorithms determine how highly certain pieces of information are ranked in the feeds that the users, in the personalized feeds of users. So if the platform is running the algorithm, has set the parameters of the algorithm that determines whether or not I get to see a news story to begin with, or any kind of story, then the platform has taken on a certain responsibility for having implicitly endorsed this story as being something that is worthwhile seeing. And so at this moment, what is worthwhile is determined basically on features like how much it's being clicked at. Effectively, a lot of it boils down to what kind of things will keep you on the platform so that you will have more chance of engaging with advertising, which is the actual revenue source. And questions of the public good don't really play into how the content is being served to people. So in that sense, I would say that the platforms need to take responsibility as well for the content and not just the producers of it. And you can see, due to the current the current high level of concerns around fake news, that platform providers like Facebook are starting to think in that direction, that they have a certain responsibility as to what kind of content is on their site. So I think that this is something that should be discussed more. Who has responsibility and what kind of responsibility, what the features that are being used. So the ranking algorithm is one thing, but also questions of how the information is being presented to you. For instance, a lot of social media sites, once a story is being posted onto them, it is very difficult to see where they originated from. So it's difficult for people to assess the quality of the story based on the original source. If you see it on Facebook, you no longer know whether it came from a high-quality newspaper or a site that was just started last week by a group of kids somewhere. Those kinds of issues, how information is being presented to you. I think it's important to think about editorial responsibility more broader than purely the question of who created the content, but also how is it being presented.
Thanks, Karen. It's Olivier speaking. And one of the things, I think it was last week, that Facebook has indeed announced that they will start doing editorial work on fake news, etc. But I mean, historically, this was performed by end users, wasn't it? You could like the content or you could not like. I think there's a sort of another button, or report the content for abuse or whatever. The same sort of thing as you can find in, I think it was in YouTube and in other places. And yet, the concern, I think, that might be raised here is whether you are not suddenly giving more powers to these platforms as censors, I guess, and they would then end up being pressurized by one country or another to censor the news or the information or the feed one way or other. And of course, we've seen the whole right to be forgotten that France has asked for when it comes down to search engine results. If this is to be applied worldwide and not just on servers that would serve French IP addresses, then why wouldn't Saudi Arabia then come up with, and I'm picking Saudi Arabia as an example of a country with perhaps even more restrictions on content than our countries, and why wouldn't they then set the standards as to what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and ask those platforms to remove content on other bases? I mean, are there safeguards for this currently, or is this all in motion and we're not really sure yet?
So my observation is that it's currently quite fluid. It's pretty much all in motion. The proposals that Facebook has made recently were actually along the lines of not immediately blocking, but you would get a notification, a red frame or something, and a triangle that says this content is suspect, it might be fake news, as opposed to immediately removing it. So they are trying to tread carefully, and I think in that respect they're doing the right thing. It is something where we need to be careful that it isn't abused for censorship. Absolutely, yeah. It's not an easy one to get right, which is why I think we need to engage with the policymakers to make sure that we don't get rash, rapidly pushed through legislation that then ends up being something that can be misused for censorship. And we see that there is debate happening at the legislative level. So the recent roundup of EU trust issues that you sent around actually was that I think there were a couple of countries already starting to look at fake news issue. Yes, the Irish Ministry for Communications is looking to create a watchdog digital safety commissioner. France has 8 media outlets that will work with Facebook to reduce fake news on platforms. And here in the UK, there is the parliamentary committee. I don't remember exactly which one it is right now, but one of the UK parliamentary committees has an inquiry now. The submission deadline for written evidence is the 3rd of March. So quite an inquiry on the fake news issue.
Okay, thanks for this, Ansgar. Now, there are some questions in the chat, which I'm going to read to you from Gregory and from Wale. And then there is also Shiva Subramanian, who is waiting to speak. Let's first start with the questions in the chat, and then we'll move on. So first, from Gregory, concerning trust, what if an international body like could issue seals of trust to single websites regarding privacy, respect for human rights, impartiality, fake news, etc.? Would this not enable more trust in the internet, and should we encourage this?
So from my perspective, I think that this is a good idea. Of course, it all depends on the extent to which people have trust in the body that is doing this. So to what extent do people trust, for instance, UNESCO or other UN bodies? I know certain sectors in the population within some countries don't trust anything to do with the UN. But the idea of having a trusted third party, however we can find them, to be able to provide some kind of a seal of approval, I think is a good one. And it's actually something that is also being discussed in the realm of assigning of terms and conditions of websites to make sure whether or not a website is going to be handling your data in a secure way. The one way to get around the 50 pages of terms and conditions written in legalese that nobody ever reads, but they tick the box to say they agree with everything anyway, is to put this kind of a seal as well, have a trusted third party analyze the terms and conditions and then say, okay, this site is good enough to a certain level. So kind of a traffic light type of system was proposed. So what I'm just talking about, this proposal regarding terms and conditions, is something that came out of two recent inquiries in Parliament as well. So yes, it's a good concept. I think it's worth exploring further. The key is going to be finding a trusted body to do this, that people will recognize as a good body for assessing whether something's safe and good.
Thank you. And just noting in the chat from Nigel Hickson, answering Gregory's suggestion, we went down the road regarding certification of sites 10 years ago in the UK and did not get far, but perhaps it's worth another look. So the next question is from Wale, and that's as follows. Thank you for the presentation. How do you or what mechanisms do you think users, we're talking about the millions of users, can get engaged in this framework fully to purposely educate them and build their trust?
I think that's a good question, how to engage a broad user base to get them really working on this. I don't have an answer to how to reach really millions with this. I've occasionally joked that we should be having something like a terms and conditions awareness day or something like that, where all media will get engaged to get people to think about certain aspects around the internet services that they use. But it's not that easy to actually get off the ground. We are engaging with schools, just from our university research project kind of side. We're engaging in schools to develop things called youth juries, a kind of present scenarios related to the internet, to young people's rights on the internet and how data is being used, and get them to discuss from their point of view what are the problems and what are their solutions that they're thinking about. So this is particularly sort of young users, 13 to 17-year-olds we're dealing with. But we are in no way reaching the millions that, as you say, need to be reached. We're dealing with a school-by-school basis.
And this, it's Olivia speaking, this looks sometimes a little bit like an onion, isn't it? How many layers are there that you need to reach to be able to reach everyone? One of the things that we've been trying to do at ISOC England is to have a university group, so educational university group, having academics from various research institutes and universities that deal with internet governance as such. And we have put together a list of those internet governance courses, which we will be sharing shortly. I'm just thinking about this, one of these sort of tasks in hand that need to be dealt with. And yet, that's of course internet governance courses. You know, there's so few people that know that internet governance actually exists. And then after that, there is the wider 3 billion, I think now, internet users who really are just following. Well, they just don't seem to know how to differentiate between fake and real news and all of the different angles that you might have out there on the internet. And it really is down to how far do you have to go on this. Certification of websites, yes and no. One of the things that we have had in recent discussions, and that was over in the IGF in Guadalajara, it was a corridor discussion or over a glass of wine. It was a case of, well, the moment you start to introduce some kind of certification process, even when it comes down to the next question I was going to ask, and that's on IoT, the security of Internet of Things devices. The moment you introduce that, you provide such a power in the hands of the certificating body that this power may be misused, or that body will be lobbied to certify specific types of topics or certify specific types of devices when you look at the security of devices, and not certify other types of devices. I mean, how does this extend to the user trust when it comes down to longevity and security of IoT devices, where we have recently seen some denial of service attacks that have happened because of the very poor security of devices? Is that, I mean, what sort of answers are there to this problem?
I don't know the details about what will be presented on that particular topic. During the conference call we had earlier for setting the program on that topic, I think one of the issues that was raised was that IoT devices are devices that will be bought and installed somewhere. So we're talking, well, recently a hotel in Las Vegas, I think, bought Amazon Echo devices for all of the rooms in the hotel or something like that. Obviously, they will not be renewing those every year. This is a long-term investment that's being made. And that's sort of the issue that I think he was getting at with the longevity issue. IoT devices will be installed, and then once they're installed, they will remain in place for a long period of time, unlike mobile phones that many people, not myself, but many people have been renewing every other year. The IoT device will be there for a long time. So how do you make sure that it will remain a secure device, if it even was one to begin with, over that whole period, especially since IoT devices tend to have poor interfaces for doing things like updating the firmware? I think it's that direction that he's talking about, but I'm not completely sure.
Okay, thanks for this. Desiree, you had a question that you typed in the chat. Do you wish to sort of expand on this?
Sure, I can. Thank you. I think I was obviously, again, asking maybe a difficult question, but wanted to know how Ansgar is thinking at the moment, since you presented all the challenges that we see in the networks of technologies and the ecosystem and the users' trust, as well as the challenges that they meet. Is it healthy to have a campaign that would actually point to these missing links and that are currently removing trust from these 4 layers? Or is it a healthy attitude to actually be untrusted? So my question is how if we were to focus on users, what should be the users' attitude today, and when are we likely to see some improvements that it may change in the future? What is the timeline here?
Yes, very difficult. We definitely want users to be able to trust the internet at a certain level, because that's the whole point of them being able to use it. If you totally distrust it, then you're not going to want to use it. You won't be able to get the benefits from it. Actually, in a way, that's one of the things that came up when we were dealing with the question of young people's rights online, that a lot of the current education around the internet is all about the internet safety. Be afraid. The internet is a dangerous place. This kind of problem can happen. This kind of person can stalk you, and this is how your data can be stolen. And basically, it's all about the negatives, and none of the positives is being highlighted. So the question is how to get that balance. But as you said, we have the problem that a lot of the points that we say are important in order to be able to maintain trust are being undermined. I mean, the Investigative Powers Act was already discussed. In that environment, it would not be responsible for us to tell people to just go ahead and trust and hope for the best. We need to recognize the real situation and say, you should take precautions. And I mean, in a way, it doesn't completely contradict, because we are saying that things like encryption should be a right. It's a part of having a trusted system is having the right to use encryption. So telling people to please go and use encryption doesn't actually contradict our position there. But it is a tricky thing, how to communicate, to say, the internet has so many good things, and we want to build your trust, and that's why we want you to engage in the policy-making process. We want people to engage, but then we have often the legislative side that isn't really engaging, and then why should I bother to get engaged in something if ultimately it's not going to be picked up? So maybe it's a question of being able to show results so that people can say, yes, engaging with the process does actually help. Yeah, tricky issue.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer.
Thanks, Ansgar. There is a question that I've received from Shiva, who was on the on Zoom, and then he dropped off because his phone system didn't work out. So here is a comment from him. Fake news, regarding fake news is sometimes so well written and engineered that even those who are well educated and familiar with fake news and how fake news are written are fooled by them. This is one kind of danger. The more dangerous kind is that not so well written, easily seen as fake news by the experts, but still surprisingly fools the majority of internet users. Usually this is the kind that is often exchanged virally. What we require is a community or user process akin to reputation stars in open source forums, whereby the experts make a distinction between fake news and real news. It needs to be a wider internet process rather than a platform-owned process to maximize fairness. So that was the point from Shiva. And then Gregory also mentioned, with regards to having a certifying body, he had it in the chat that it could be a heterogeneous one, like a body of bodies, decentralized and more difficult to lobby.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point about trying to make sure that sort of the rating, the evaluation of whether news is trustworthy or whether it's fake news or some propaganda in some other kind of way, that this should not be just a platform by platform, independent siloed kind of thing, but a cross-platform communication of that. I think that's a very valid point, and actually that I think connects nicely with the idea of data portability, that data should be flowing between platforms. I mean, this is a sort of slightly side issue, the problem of siloification, and that is happening with a lot of these platforms, which sort of goes counter the free and open internet philosophy to begin with. So yes, some technologies to help ranking of the trustworthiness that isn't bound to the platform would be great. I actually know that there is a local SME that is working on a tool for that, but I shouldn't say too much because it's still in early prototype stage. He doesn't want me to reveal things that we could infringe on his IP. But yes. But yet, as part of your question, there was the issue of even the experts are being fooled from time to time, which is a problem. But I mean, it's a problem that we've always had with even in traditional newspapers. Errors have been published, but it was a clear way of publishing a rectification afterwards. So perhaps that would also be necessary. Something like you've read this fake news story and it was revealed afterwards that it was fake news, that because you've read this news story, you will automatically receive a notification that tells you, wait a minute, this wasn't correct. Problematic again, because in order to implement that, you would have to do all kinds of tracking. And who's going to do that? How are you going to trust how they're going to use that data?
And I guess there's a privacy issue to tracking.
Yes, definitely. So there's a lot still unclear how best to tackle it. But I think it's at this stage, probably the best thing is to raise all of these possible options so that they can then be looked at in more detail as to what would be required in order to implement them, and then evaluate whether this kind of implementation is going to cause more problems due to things like privacy issues, or is going to actually solve things for us. I think there was a second question that I'm forgetting about.
Not specifically on Shiva's questions. Well, just mention about the reputation stars, and whereby the experts make a distinction between fake news and real news. But the question was, I guess, once you have a reputation system, I mean, we found that fake news appears to be spreading a lot faster than the follow-up, I guess, that happens afterwards, that basically rectifies the sort of situation and says, actually, these are fake news. Is this attributable? I mean, is that sort of just human nature to sort of spread the sensationalist stuff and not spread the boring stuff?
Partially, but I think it also connects to the question of how the platforms are doing the recommending of content. The rectification story, probably people will see, but they're less likely to then click the like button or something like that. In a way, they're less likely to promote the story such that the algorithm will then say, oh, this is something that everybody else is going to be interested in seeing. So that's in a way where things like editorial responsibility of the platform comes back in, that they should have the responsibility to say, basically any rectification story should by default have a ranking at least as high as the original story had. Something like that might be an idea.
Okay, so here's a follow-up from Wale. In fact, I think I only asked the first part of the question, so I'll start again. So Wale says, specifically the ordinary internet users, home users watching smart TV, using smart meters for electricity at homes, and online shoppers, limiting users to just students would not necessarily capture the concerns of the generality of people, sort of a more wider population. You mentioned of the various things that were taking place in schools and the sort of new programs, but it seemed to be a bit restricted. And it says here, or Wale adds, some of these users might be having a certain degree of distrust in ensuring the security of their online privacy, protection of their personal data, vis-a-vis trending big data analytics for marketing by the business community and cloud services. How do you address this? And I guess this somehow touches on the search ranking technologies, isn't it?
Hello?
Oh, we can hear you now, Wale. Yes, please. If you could expand on this, that would be great.
All right, thank you so much. Good evening. Can you hear me now?
Very well. Go ahead.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Just to follow up to your reading out the text I type on the chat. So it's just basically in terms of capturing the ordinary internet users at home and people trying to buy things online. Basically, most of these users, they've got no knowledge about what it means in terms of their online privacy, in terms of security of their online privacy, and also, the protection of their personal data. So they don't have they don't have any knowledge or basic knowledge about all these things about. So, but the government and the big companies, ensuring that the data they are gathering from these individuals are being used for marketing and for government purposes. So, what do you think, and what is the best way do you think these could be addressed among the users, especially? And do you think if this is not addressed properly, do you think it will, in the future, have an impact on the development of internet? Generally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you raised a very important point about people's ability, sort of sometimes referred to, I guess, also as digital literacy, kind of, to understand how the system works and therefore how data is being collected and what happens to your data afterwards. Not just the data collection, but also I think issues of cybersecurity are an important one. Understanding what happens if we're talking about IoT, understanding what the possible implications are of just connecting another device to the internet directly. It doesn't go through the other firewall and virus protectors, etc., that you have on your PC at the current moment. It's connected directly to the internet. Questions of using the factory settings instead of changing the passwords and those kinds of problems. The way in which it will impact, I think, people's trust in the system is primarily as soon as something bad happens. As soon as there are cases where their own data is affected, where their system is hacked or something like that, it will directly affect their trust. Because we are talking about the vast majority of people who don't spend a lot of time thinking about these issues and therefore also aren't reading all of the news stories about these issues. So if it isn't affecting you personally, probably you won't be paying attention to it. Which goes a bit in the direction that has also been brought up at some conferences I was recently at, of saying maybe we should not be relying or completely saying everything is the responsibility of the end user. Maybe there is responsibility to government oversight or non-governmental organizations being involved in oversight of this. It sort of connects to the labels that was mentioned earlier of having a third party certifying something. But it's also basically, if in most kinds of devices, most things that we buy, if we buy a car, it has to go through safety checks. If we buy food, there is an agency, a food agency that makes sure that it's safe to eat. We don't expect all users to know the chemistry of food, what is safe to eat and what isn't. We don't expect everybody to do an analysis of the airbags in their car to check whether or not this car is safe. We've said this is a responsibility of certification agencies. But of course, all of those things depend on the extent to which the government in your country is able to run these kinds of agencies in a trustworthy way. And for things like food safety, yes, in the UK at least, we think the government's doing a reasonable job. But in our current view of how the government deals with data, we might not feel that comfortable with saying it's going to be a government organization that's doing safeguarding of that side. But this is definitely something that's come up. And actually, it was a European conference, and I think it was from one of the German participants that the idea of more of a certifying body came up. And it was a challenge to the IoT device makers to say that they need to get their devices certified to meet cybersecurity standards, to which the IoT device maker responded that it would make the devices too expensive if they had to go through this. But that's a business question. If you're going to say that the only way for me to be able to make a device that's cheap enough is by making it not safe, then I think it's questionable whether we should say that's okay. I think there's a reasonable argument to say, well, in that case, maybe you shouldn't be the one making the device.
We probably would need another hour to discuss the whole safety of Internet of Things devices and the balance between safety on one side and cost on the other, having very simple devices and very unsafe devices at the same time, the simpler they are. Wally, did you have a quick follow-up? I realize we have 2 minutes until the end of this call, so just if you had a quick thing.
No, thank you so much. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yes, thank you so much. If there is any follow-up, I will surely, send an email, to the mailing list, and for any feedback. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thanks for this, and thank you very much for this presentation, Ansgar. The next steps for this are going to be as follows. First, I'm not sure if you're all aware, but we do have a policy discussion mailing list. If you are interested in being on this mailing list and you haven't, and you're not on it and so on, then just drop a note to contact@isoc-e.org and we'll add you on that mailing list. But then, of course, Ansgar next week is going to be traveling over to Amsterdam and fly the ISOC England, UK England. And don't ask me, that's another hour of discussion, by the way, why it's called UK England. But anyway, ISOC UK colors in Amsterdam. And then we will have another webinar that will take place, I don't know, maybe a week or a couple of weeks after that meeting. And we will be announcing this on our mailing lists and to all of our members, where Ansgar will be able to come back to us with the feedback of what has been discussed in Amsterdam and I guess any lessons learned and perhaps any action points that we might have to then affect in this country. I'm not sure, but we'll find out. Ansgar, anything that I've forgotten?
No, I think you've covered everything. Thank you very much.
So I'd like to thank you for taking all this time on this, and thanks to all the people who have attended today. This call is recorded, as we said, so I'll be making sure that it gets put out there. I think Jolie is making another recording of it, and we'll share that recording with everyone for anybody who hasn't been able to make it today. And I know quite a few people wanted to make it and couldn't. They sent me notes of apology, but they'll be able to watch the webinar in their own time. And thank you, Jolie. Yes. Our person who is based in New York, but an honorary New Yorker, as Jolie is a Brit as well. So thanks to everyone. And this webinar is now adjourned. And have a very good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.